word on the charts. I encourage you to do that, but I do summarize things. Validation and verification have some standard definitions. This is one out of the Program Management Book of Knowledge, the PMBOK, that I found. They're pretty good. The two ones there that are of most interest for me, because they're easy to remember. It's hard to remember all those 20, 30 words, whatever. But validation tries to answer the question, did we build the right software? Okay. Verification, slight twist on that, did we build the software right? Okay. And the difference between the two comes down to verification has some kind of truth models, usually, that it can refer to. So it may be a standard as a truth model. If the requirements exist, I can check my code and my design to the requirements. If I'm dealing with an implementation, I can check to something maybe like a concept of operations. Once I get the whole system up and running, if I have those. So verification kind of has a truth model. It's a hard question to answer, but it's a little doable because I've got a reference point. Validation is a much harder problem, which is why a lot of people, a lot of contractors don't want to mess with it, okay? Because it goes steps back and goes, what if the requirements are wrong? Right? Can the requirements be wrong? Anybody seen a wrong requirement? I've seen a lot of them, where you look at it and you go, I don't know what this means. Then you get one interpretation and another interpretation. And you get people arguing about that. Well, validation tries to step in and go, okay, what did you really want? Okay, as the customer or the user. Now that's easier said than done, because a lot of times, nothing against the government people and the customers in the room, a lot of times the customer doesn't even know what they want. It's the old thing, I'll know it when I see it. Okay, so you produce the thing and they look at it and go, well, that wasn't it. You know, and we see that a lot. So a good validation and verification team, whether it's inside of a project or an IV&V, if they have that knowledge and skill stuff I was saying that I found was necessary, they can help answer that question by saying, we know this kind of system, we know what it should do, here's what you want for a valid situation. It is a harder question. Like I said, managers I've worked with, they love verification. They were very nervous about committing to anything on validation. 1012, which I will talk about, has their definitions. If you look back and forth between the two words, they're very similar, but because they're focused on verification and validation, the definition of verification is a lot larger. But you do see things like I was mentioning for correctness and at each life cycle stage. So some people interpret verification to mean that during the life cycle I verify, and then at the end I do my validation and verification together in some tests and activities and declare victory and I'm done. My experience is you want to do some validation also through the life cycle, particularly on those issues or requirements I was just talking about. If you have somebody that really understands, say, like financial systems, and can look at the requirements for a financial system and go, you know, that's just not going to work. And you do that up front, that's going to be a cost savings. So I believe you can do validation and verification throughout the life cycle both, but certainly verification is I'll say in the life cycle something that definitely can go on in pretty great detail. And then validation has similar kinds of things, but you'll see, you know, solves the right problem. Okay, and we've seen systems that went all the way through the life cycle, spent lots and lots of money, and were delivered, and the customers looked at it and went, this doesn't work for what we needed. And they throw it away and they start again. Those kind of things governments, industry wants to avoid. So a little bit of a story here, and I'll continue this. And I know none of you are building rockets, but rockets are cool. I don't know. I think they're cool. And the reason I think other people think they're cool is because when we blow one of those things up, it's on the news around the world, right? You know, I mean, I'm here in Malaysia and Asia, and somebody blows a rocket up somewhere, unless it's like some countries that don't want to talk about when they blow a rocket up. It's on the news because it's really big explosions. They're really cool. I've seen rockets launched very up close and personal. You know, an amazing experience. So the system I worked on was part of the space shuttle, which is now retired. It was very strange. My career started, the space shuttle was just starting to fly and come online, and I worked it for a lot of years, and then a few years back it retired, and I guess that was when I decided I should retire. I was like, wow, I've lived a long time. So I'm semi-retired. I do this for fun. Yeah, I know I have a strange definition of fun. So, so on this rocket, and I've kind of genericized it there. These things take off. The ones in the U.S. come from Florida mostly, and they go up. And people go, "Why do we care about rockets?" Well, how many of you have cell phones or internet connections? Those are all made possible by satellites that we put up on orbit. And modern life, pretty much all modern life, would not be as convenient if we didn't have rockets and satellites in the space industry. And it's interesting, we're seeing the space industry move from strictly governments to now private. And some of you that are younger in the room, if you get enough money, you may be able to take a trip to the moon for vacation at some point. It'll be expensive, I'm guessing. But they're working on space tourism and things like that. So we had system needs. And I'm not going to explain what apogee and perigee and inclination, parking orbit, and deployment are, but those are all things that had to happen in the rocket. It's rocket scientists stuff, as they say. And those are system needs. Okay, it's what the system had to do. We had hardware, certainly, really big, noisy hardware, by the way. Really, really big, noisy hardware, which are the rocket motors and the controllers and all kinds of things. And it's amazing when you see one of these things. It doesn't look like it should fly because it's hundreds and hundreds of kilograms, thousands and millions. But there's reaction controls, there's the payload, there's the satellite that sits on top of the thing. Those are usually worth, in U.S. money, the cheap ones start at 200, 300 million. I've worked on some that were like 1.5 billion for one satellite. You get noticed if you destroy something that's worth 1.5 billion U.S., by the way. It gets very upset to the government and things like that. And so you have the hardware, you have the system, and then you have the software. You have code, you have models, you have documentation. We used to joke about the thud factor in documentation, which meant we took the document, like a requirements document, put it on a table and slid it off, and the noise it made when it hit the ground kind of helped us know how big the effort was. And some of my requirements documents, they were that thick. That, you know, they would break your foot if they landed on you. So that was a metric we had, you know, the thud factor. You got to have fun metrics. You got to have real metrics. We had thousands, tens of thousands of requirements that we went through on these things. So, and so the beginning of the story, I'm going to keep coming back to it, is that it was a space shuttle system. My life gets marked by certain things, birth of children and nephews and nieces and things like that. Most of us relate to that. I have some other unusual ones. We blew up one of the space shuttles in the early days. The system I was working on was flying on that system. Even now I'm having chills going up and down my body. It was a very traumatic day. Everybody was immediately under investigation. I realized, and that was about a year and a half into my career with that company, I realized verification, validation can get very serious. Certainly with life, because people died in that. Wasn't anything that we would do the way, but nobody knew. But you lose a lot of money, just financial money or things like that. You don't want to be on the front of the newspaper or the nightly news. I'm pretty sure we don't want to do those things, unless it's like a good thing. And that's okay. So I'm going to keep coming back to that story. So in verification validation, we have other activities than just testing. And this one confuses people a little bit because so much of our industry just test. Everything's test. And test is one of my favorite things, by the way. But there's 4 others that classically get acknowledged, at least in 1012. Now, 1012 doesn't go into them in any detail. It leaves those for other standards and things like that. 1012's planning and integrity levels and things like that. But we have inspection, we have demonstration and test, and I'll explain in a moment how those are different. And then we'll have analysis. And I'm going to go through each one of these. But that's the things that we kind of used in the V&V programs, the IV&V programs I were on throughout the whole life cycle. My favorite is test, but I'll explain about that in a moment. So inspection. Inspection is using the human brain and the human eyes to look at the product, whatever the product is. It comes with names like reviews, walkthroughs, and those kinds of names. There are standards. ISO is working on 20246, which is a review standard. IEEE has some review standards that I've worked on in the past. And the idea is that as soon as you have anything, a contract, a plan, a requirements document, the human brain is really, really good at some things. One of those is looking at it and reviewing it and inspecting it. And so the first thing I did on a lot of projects that I got on was I did a form of inspection. I sat down and I reviewed the plans and I reviewed the requirements and things like that. Again, it's kind of strange in some things. But a lot of people, when they come into a project, they just come in and, start running a test or writing code or something like that. I like to get the big picture and look at those documents. Those documents were produced for a reason. Sometimes they just sit on a shelf, which isn't good. And if they always sit on a shelf, I would say, why are we producing that? Get rid of it. It's not benefiting. So I would inspect the document. And the notion, you all buy cars, right? Some of you bought cars. People literally walk around and kick tires, right? Now in the old days, the old tires, by the way, if you kicked them and they were falling apart, you kick it and it'd blow up. Older than any of us in the room. But ask yourself, if I have a requirement that says the computer is supposed to be red, how do you test that? Human eye is pretty good at determining color, except for about 10% of the male population, by the way, has problem with colors. But there's some things, some requirements that the human is just good at. But red's a good example. If the inspector is colorblind, should they be doing that inspection? No. And there's the problem with inspection and verification validation through inspection, is how you do it and how you do it may get a slightly different answer. So I've used inspection. Sometimes it's the only way to go, particularly when I'm looking at hardware and things like that. Very, very useful on hardware kinds of V&V. But we as procurers and providers, you have to know where the weaknesses of something are. When the concept should not be employed is important on inspection. But inspection is really good on some things. You can be really good up front and early. One of the rocket systems I worked on, we inspected, reviewed with a big team every single requirement. There were about 1,500 of them at the level we were working at. That took about 5 months, not working at full time, Probably 20 to 50 reviews, each one about 2 hours, some a little bit more. But we really did a good job on those requirements. And one would say, well, did they change after that? Well, the answer was yes, they did change. They changed about 5% per month. And that scared some customers and management and the IV&V people that I had. They were like, we're changing too much. Anybody doing Agile?